It's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And I was listening to every word of what you found in that portion of the anonymous book, which is, what, 2 weeks away from being published, approximately, something like that?
Yeah.
And does it give you any setting for these meetings? I mean, we don't know in these discussions whether this is a budget discussion or whether it's a Homeland Security discussion. Is that the way it reads, that you can't quite fix that?
Well, it reads like somebody who's in direct contact with the president, or somebody who is otherwise able to assert confidently that they can directly quote the president and describe not only his actions and his words, but his demeanor. And what's described here is security stuff, in part. And the president's odd fixation on visual memes and visual cues, even when he can't absorb anything with a comma in it, basically anything that has more than one concept in it that's delivered to him in prose at one time.
And with any other White House, or most other White Houses, there'd be ways of narrowing down the possibilities of who was likely to hear conversations like that. The trouble is, this was it certainly was for a long time, maybe still is, the open door Oval Office, where we have these reports of Donald Trump just waving all sorts of people in. There isn't really a gatekeeper. Apparently, John Kelly tried to be a gatekeeper to keep people out, but you couldn't really do that. So there's a kind of atmosphere in there where it's very hard, I think, for people in that White House to keep track of who might be in the room at any given time.
Yes, and that's actually part of what Anonymous writes about, is that the president would fix his mind on something, often something that he got from television, decide he was going to do it, and then randomly the next White House aide who he came across would be the person who was in charge of receiving that briefing from the president and potentially acting on it, or conveying a message to the White House press spokesperson that this should now be conveyed to the public as the new idea of the American government and the new action that the president was ordering being taken, that it was somewhat random, that it was just whoever he lit upon who was near him would then be roped into whatever the latest crazy idea was. And that is interesting in terms of his behavior and the process in this White House, but it also very much tells you that it could be complicated to figure out who the person was who was at all of these meetings, who witnessed all of these things, and the process of elimination may not apply here if literal randos walking by are drafted into these conversations.
So this book comes after Michael Wolff has taken us into similar scenes in the first Inside the Trump White House book, after Bob Woodward has taken us into similar scenes in his Inside the Trump White House book. How does this read compared to those? And what is the difference when you're holding an account that is written by someone who is part of the team in that room?
Clearly, one of the things that is somewhat unique about this is that it's written from the perspective of a senior administration official and somebody who did not come into it disinclined toward President Trump's agenda. And so it's written from the point of view of somebody who isn't there to be critical and isn't there to observe. It's from the point of view of somebody who's there to try to make government. And so when I think you've had other authors characterize the feelings of their sources, even multiple sources, in terms of how people around Trump reacted to him or felt about his behavior. In this case, you get it in the first person. You also are privy to conversations, according to Anonymous, that this author had with other people in a similar role, other people in senior administration jobs who were pro-Trump, who were nevertheless driven beyond the point of distraction to actual panic in terms of trying to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. So you do get, you're closer to the, I guess I would say that you're closer to the source, right? Because this is the source writing in his or her own terms. But it's not inconsistent with the portraits that we've had through, daily newspaper reporting on the behavior of the president and from those books that you described. It is all of a piece. And there is news in this book, which has started to be reported elsewhere. Other people have started to see passages of the book. But the stuff that I was able to read tonight, I think, gives you particularly a window into the upset among people who were otherwise inclined to support this president, who were horrified by and full of regret for their own decision to be there.
I think, Rachel, for me, the shocking part of tonight about hearing you read it is not that I felt like I was learning something new about Donald Trump. The other accounts have had all of this kind of stuff in it. But it is yet another moment where you kind of sit there and you think about all of the people around Donald Trump who are going along with this, including the author of this piece. Now, this author takes us into the interior dialogue of how difficult that is, and maybe I should have resigned at Charlottesville, maybe I should have done this. But is that a look inside hundreds of minds of Republicans in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, or have they just stopped thinking about this? Have they just gone along with this long enough that they are just now robotically going along with all of Donald Trump's stuff?
It's a very good insight and a very good question. I mean, I think that if we think the best of our fellow Americans who have gone into public service, and we imagine the best possible intentions for those whose hearts and minds we don't know ourselves, the best case scenario you can think in some of the worst moments, like, after Charlottesville, when he's praising the neo-Nazi side and, all of these things, is that people maybe did think that they were the adult in the room, and that by them being in that job, things were going to be better because they were not that bad a person, and they would stop things from going as bad as out in order to hold their place in the administration or in Republican politics was somehow going to benefit the country. Clearly, this anonymous author was in that position when this person wrote the op-ed last year, saying, literally, the adults are in the room. We want to reassure you, America. Don't worry. We're trying to thwart the worst stuff he wants to do. That is not the tone of this book. The tone of this book is people trying to thwart his will within the administration is not enough. A, there's not enough of them. B, the best ones are gone already. And C, even the ones that are still there are not able to do enough to protect the country. This is a warning about danger to the country and the fact that having some self-proclaimed adults in the room isn't enough. And so if that is the best case scenario for how some people of conscience have been there supporting or sticking up for this president, this is an argument against that.
It really, a warning is the most kind of understated title that book could possibly have.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.